I want to start off talking about AI. Obviously, it's like a truism. Of course, it is the great disrupting factor of the moment. On one hand, of course, you have the Silicon Valley bros, rubbing their hands, and the venture capitalists because they can see how much money is going to be made. And then on the other, you have people that think that the robots are going to take over the world and that we're all doomed. And I think most of us are sort of somewhere in between. I've had the privilege of writing narrative-led video games for 45 years. And it was born out of the disruptive technology of home computers. And indeed, we've been buffeted, as has been described by Nick so eloquently since then throughout the whole of history. We have a massive launch next year of Grand Theft Auto 6. Grand Theft Auto is probably certainly the biggest video game license and possibly the biggest entertainment license in the world at the moment. So it is something that we're looking forward to, and it's going to be a massive cultural event that will be avoided by films and video games and any other art form because it is going to be so extraordinary. What most people don't know is that Grand Theft Auto was actually originated in Dundee. And I'm going to argue that it came from disruptive technologies of the 19th century directly. And of course, that Aberdeen's harbour is too small for whaling ships to unload their kill. Bear with me on this one. But first of all, if we can have a bit of self-indulgence, the British games industry started with this fine computer, the Sinclair ZX81, which had 1K of memory. Put that in context, and forgive me if this is patronizing, my iPhone has 256 million times as much memory as we had then. But this was an extraordinary computer. As a child born in the 60s, it gave us the opportunity to control the television. Up until this point, the television beamed information, it beamed entertainment. It was absolutely one way. For the first time, we could actually write programs, we could poke information into memory. And we were masters of the television. It was extraordinary. And initially, you can see some of the red commands, which are BASIC. BASIC is a very simple language, very easy to learn. But very quickly, we got frustrated. We thought, why can't we? Well, let's try and do more. And we discovered that actually there was a language, Z80, which drove the processors. And we learned how to control and write in Z80. And suddenly, we could do the most extraordinary things. And obviously, 1K, by today's standards, very, very slow processor. But to put it in context, this had the same memory and about the same level of power as the computers that landed Apollo 11 on the moon only just over a decade earlier. This was extraordinary. I left school in 1980, and I was very lucky to get a sponsorship with Ford. To read mechanical engineering management at the University of Manchester, so it's great to be back. And in that time, I met a friend who was also a student, who we would play with Galaxians and Space Invaders together in the pub. And one day we were sitting down, and he said, I've just started a home computer company. I've disassembled the ROM of the ZX80, and now I'm going to start publishing games. You like telling stories. Why don't you write an adventure? I'll program it, and we'll publish it. And here is my friend Richard Turner. And we were part of a generation of what were called bedroom developers, because we developed in our bedrooms of our parents' house. But it was an incredible, incredible creative moment. It was absolutely extraordinary. And it turned out that in Britain, we're extraordinarily good at writing video games. Programmers brought up on 1K of memory were able to really push the computers way beyond what anybody thought was possible. The artists created pixel art, which is so revered today. But pixel art is a product of the constraints, a tiny color palette and very, very low resolution. And I think we also ought to give great credit to the composers and the audio people who, because the memory was so small, they would define their own waveforms, and those waveforms would then be crafted into music and sound effects. And then we discovered that we could actually go to trade shows and we could meet fans of our games and sell our games. It was absolutely extraordinary. I finished my game. It was called, very, very inspiringly, it was called Adventure Bee. I am responsible both for the logo and the package design. So if anybody wants any instructions on great packaging, please come and see me afterwards. We got a little bit more savvy, and you'll actually probably be able to recognize that the game, my first game, was rather stolen from Indiana Jones, but let's not talk about it too much. But I think the game that we should be most proud of at Arctic, the company that I was with Richard at, was 1K Chess. To write a chess program that plays a good game of chess in 1K is absolutely extraordinary. And it could only have been done by a British programmer honed on this extraordinary technology. I remember the programmer, David Horn, was very frustrated that the game couldn't do en passant. He couldn't get it to do en passant. It's absolutely extraordinary. So we kind of really thrived on this disruptive technology, which kept changing things, and worked with publishers. And here we are back in 1992 with the beginning of Revolution, dressed up like new romantic stars. It was absolutely fantastic. So let's get back to Manchester. Here we have Alan Turing, who produced the first, or worked on, the first computer into which you could load memory back in 1948. He, of course, had worked at Bletchley Park to create the computer, or to work on the computer there, and cracking of the Enigma code during the war. An absolutely extraordinary man. And just 35 years later, the work that he did then allowed Sir Clive Sinclair here to produce the ZX81. The ZX81 was assembled in Dundee, and that is where we're going to loop round to. You can see where I'm going. But I can see all your inquisitive faces. You want to know about the whales. Well, thank you for asking. Scotland had a major whaling industry in Victorian times, and they brought the whales back to Scotland, and they would have gone into Aberdeen Harbour, except the harbour's too small. So they went to Dundee, and the River Tay is 3 miles wide at Dundee, and it became the whaling centre. On the other side of the world, this is a plant, jute, for which Dundee is famous. Jute, for 5,000 years in Bangladesh, has been grown to create very, very strong fabric. And a few hundred years ago, the Europeans decided to start importing it into Europe. And it was discovered that if you applied whale oil, then the production was much, much more efficient. So massive, great mills were, here's a mill in Dundee, producing jute. And it employed a lot of women, because women generally have smaller hands, and they could work the looms. Very, very grueling work, very, very low paid. And then the financiers, as financiers do, decided that they wanted to make more money. They wanted to reduce costs. They wanted to improve the efficiency. And they turned to a man, Edmund Cartwright, who was an inventor. And Edmund Cartwright was absolutely inspired by an automata that played chess. It was called the Turk. I know it's not a great name, but and this is in 1980. This was a recreation, and this machine traveled around Europe and America, playing people at chess and beating them. It was absolutely extraordinary. And Cartwright was to ask whether it was more difficult to construct a machine that shall weave than one which will make all the varieties of moves required in that complicated game of chess. Well, he answered his own question and went on to design the steam-powered loom, absolutely inspired by this automata that played such an extraordinary game of chess. Now, it turned out, you won't be too surprised to hear that the automata was a fake. There was a chess-playing expert who crammed in there and used string and magnets. But that's not the point. The point is that it inspired Cartwright to create something extraordinary because he believed this to be true. And then what happened was that the women who had worked the machinery got trained to run the machinery, and they became, instead of the low-pay, grueling work, they became skilled and much better paid. And as the industry declined in Dundee, new companies came in, like Timex. And Timex built their watches in Dundee, and Sir Clive Sinclair, when he wanted his ZX81s to be produced, he commissions Timex to build them. Aha! So we're going round. But the technology is only one part of video games. The aesthetic, as I will argue later, is every bit as important. And I'd like to give a big call out to D.C. Thompson, founded in 1905, founded because of the whale oil, indirectly, the huge docks allowed paper to be brought in from Scandinavia, and so it was a perfect place. And anybody of my age will have learnt to reading the Beano, with its extraordinary wacky characters and irreverent stories. 1988, a number of people left Dundee with this extraordinary training from Timex and from Sinclair. It is said that because so few people actually knew about the intricate bits, that when something went wrong with the ZX81, it would just get chucked out into a skip, and that the young people of Dundee became experts at emptying those skips and learning exactly how to repair these machines and then selling them down at the pubs. Now, I'm not sure if that's true, and I certainly wouldn't say that of Dave Jones, who left and founded DMA Design. And throughout the 90s, they produced a range of extraordinary games. But the 90s was an amazing period for Britain. We had Britpop. Anybody who's of a certain age will remember the Spice Girls, who were absolutely ubiquitous around the world. And then you had the rivalry, the Britpop rivalry between Blur and Oasis. But also in games, we were producing real world-class. And, of course, Tomb Raider from Core Design in Derby. Josh was very generous about Broken Sword, which I'd like to think redefined the adventure game. And, of course, Grand Theft Auto, a product of Dundee. Before the response the government had was to introduce computer science onto the curriculum at schools, which was absolutely brilliant. The complacency came when, in 2010, the number of people applying for computer science dropped significantly. And it was worked out that 5 years earlier, the government of the day had scrapped computer science and replaced it with ICT, information computer technology. And many of you in this room will have done English, will have had to learn ICT at school. And in being so, you were deprived of computer science, which I think is a huge, huge, huge shame. The other thing that's happening at schools, which is, I think, absolutely terrible, is that the erosion of art subjects. Because clearly, the innovation that we bring forward over hundreds of years in this country, that I think we should be very proud of, is the molding of technology and aesthetics. And as we move forward, AI is going to do more and more of the technology. But what we as human beings are able to do is bring a technical, truly innovate. At Revolution, our company, we needed to upscale some character animations. And we did explore AI, but thankfully, it was actually humans who were able to draw so much more effectively because they were able to reflect human emotion, human facial expressions. So, next May, Grand Theft Auto 6, due to launch, reportedly cost $2 billion to write, the most expensive game ever. It's likely to earn $10 billion on release, the biggest entertainment launch ever. It is a uniquely British creation because of this molding of technology and creativity, because of the irony, which is what we do so well. So my appeal to you is Coming from a country molded by many things, but including whale oil and looms and the Beano, let us celebrate and let us help steer the profound change that is coming from AI and all the other industries and technologies that are disrupting us so much. Thank you very much.